This is a sad time for me, old and crackadated. Back in 1968, I was in Vietnam. And this being Memorial Day weekend, I'd like to talk about some guys I knew that paid the ultimate sacrifice. This is going to be hard for me to get through. But first one is James Michael Holmes. He was a very good friend of mine. We went all through training together, went to Vietnam together, went to the same company. We were in different platoons, but every time our platoons met up, we would share a position. The lieutenant always arranged it where I would be on a position next to his. He knew what good friends we were. His name is James Michael Holmes. A blonde-headed guy. He was such a good and honest person. That's the reason I guess we became pretty close friends. We'd get a pass, we'd go to town together. We'd go and spend time at the little, what they called the beer garden. It was a outdoor picnic area. It had about 2 feet of sand, like a beach, and had concrete tables there and had a big roof over the whole thing. But that's where we'd go in the evenings after training was over. But when we went to Vietnam, they tried to get us in the same platoon, but didn't work out that way. But we were in the same company. And in October of '68, we went on an operation, and it was a sort of a warning to us that they issued us all brand new fatigues. That's something that just usually didn't happen, so we knew something big was up. And they sent us off to this mountain range between Phu Bai and Da Nang. The highway below this thing was called Mortar Valley. They had paved that highway so many times, the pavement was 10, 12 feet thick, because it just come in and pave over it, and they wouldn't bother the paving crew. They'd just wait for a convoy to come along and put the rockets and mortars to them. There'd been a Marine bunch try to knock them off that mountain. They'd sent, I think, the 82nd Airborne to try to knock them off that mountain, and they couldn't. So they picked the 501st. And we got off the choppers and at a fire base there. I can't even remember what the name of it was. But anyway, we had to double time from the choppers all the way to the base of that mountain in the edge of the jungle. Because as soon as we got there, mortar and rockets started falling in the paddies behind us. And then 8 days later, we were on top of that mountain. It was 1502 and 1407 was the mountain peaks. You always knew a hill by its elevation in meters. But on the 22nd, Michael led out up the trail, and I knew that trail was something bad was up that trail because we had stopped the night before after taking that 1407 hilltop. And but Mike was leading out up that trail. And this was regular NVA soldiers. I mean, they wasn't VC, they were regular North Vietnamese soldiers. One jumped out from behind a tree and put an AK round right through his chest. I was supposed to escort his body home. They couldn't send him out that day. They had to leave him there on the mountain that night. We were having trouble even getting supplies in. They tried bringing water in to us, but they had to airdrop it from above the treetops, and all the containers burst, and we'd been out of water for, this is going on 3 days, we'd been out of water. Had nothing but dried rations, so you ate what candy bars or things like that would be in it, and you couldn't eat that dry food. Tongues all swollen to thick. It just, you would have done anything for water. But the lieutenant asked me, said, "You want to escort his body home?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I sure do." Well, they put his body there with me that night. And that morning before we assaulted that hill, there he was laying there, nothing but a bloody tuft of blonde hair hanging out one end of the poncho and his feet out the other. Last time I saw him. Because we made an assault on that hill that morning, and pretty heavy stuff. They were blowing stuff up, trees, rocks, and just everything seemed to have an explosive charge in it. And then we tried again that afternoon, and I was leading the formation up, and we formed a V shape to go up the mountain that way. 1 or 2 people were in the explosive stuff and trying to get as close to the bunker complex as we could this time without firing a shot. And all of a sudden, everything exploded. It just, there was a cluster of RPGs, those old dud RPGs. They'd tie them in a cluster of 6, and they would cover a 360-degree circle, and they were about 8 to 10 feet above my head. And that first blast that went off got me. Of course, it knocked my platoon sergeant and my squad leader back down the hill, head over heels, and wounded several others. And it felt like I had been slapped between 2 great big cymbals, that everything kept turning over to the left, and I was trying to crawl, and I gathered up 2 M16s and a grenade launcher, because they had just been blown head over heels back down the hill. I mean, flying through the air. And their weapons were still laying right there. It caught them so quick. But I started crawling down the mountain. I had a box of machine gun ammunition, 2 additional M16s, and a M79 grenade launcher. And I dragged that stuff down the hill because I didn't want the enemy to get it. They were close enough to just step right out and get it. But there was still stuff cooking off in the ground, on the trees. But that prevented me from escorting Mike's body back home. So people, please honor the Memorial Day. Of course, I suffered brain damage from that, but they didn't know how to test or anything like that back then, the blast trauma. They didn't have the equipment to do it. I knew something was wrong. From that minute on, everything was different for me. But I couldn't use my left side, and I kept crawling in a semicircle, and then I'd get myself readjusted. And I crawled down the hill most of the way, and then the medic was able to get to me and bandage my leg together because it blew out half. Well, I've got to put a little short piece in here because it interrupted. That's the fault this camera has. It's somewhere around 9 to 10 minutes. It cuts off for some reason and then starts recording again. But anyway, I was at the point where I had been wounded and I lost half my right thigh. Shrapnel from the ankle to my neck, and the brain damage it did, I have to take medication for now to keep from passing out. I went for about 3.5 years, couldn't even drive a car until they finally got medication figured out to keep me functional. That's the reason sometimes I just have to stop what I'm doing. I don't care what's going on. I've got to stop what I'm doing and get to a quiet place. Because that problem with my brain will flare up, and I just become totally unable to do anything. But it cut off part of the story where I was telling about this second guy, Robert Rader, that I always walk slack for him, which is your backup as a point man. And we spent a lot of nights in a lot of positions together. I didn't have to worry about him going to sleep or me going to sleep. We always stayed awake. But the part about Robert Rader getting killed. My right thigh, big chunk of meat on the ground. But I would love to have escorted his body home. but I didn't get to do it. And 2 days before that, one of the guys that I always walked point, he would be my slack man, or I would be his slack man. Together. He got killed walking point, and the lieutenant had separated us. He made me be on the rear security, and he put Robert on the point. And I should have been his slack man. Because I could spot things that other people couldn't. I was raised in the bushes all my life. I did hunting. I did all kind of camp outs and tracking things through the woods. And I just knew the environment. And I knew if there was something wrong, I could spot the enemy a long way off. I had really good eyes and extremely good hearing. But I was so angry about not being able to walk slack for him. And then he walks up on machine gun nest, and it was Robert Rader. He was from New York. And he would get people from home to send him war comic books like Sergeant Rock and all that stuff. He loved to read those things. And he'd get war story books sent to him. He's a rather comical guy. So. But it just, and then real good friend of mine in basic training, and we went to AIT and to jump school together at Fort Benning. We went through an AIT at Fort Gordon. It was a special airborne AIT. We lived in Quonset huts out next to the swamp. You had to be careful to watch for cottonmouths and copperheads in the shower, which was down the street in the edge of the woods. Old wooden shacks, just like a primitive campground. But they wanted to be as much like being in Vietnam as they could get it. But this guy was such a humble person and just polite as he could be. His name was Roosevelt Penn. He was from Fultondale. And I believe he got killed in the Hamburger Hill operation. He was in the 502nd. I believe he was in Alpha Company of the 502nd for the 101st. But he got killed in March, and that would have been the time of the Hamburger Hill operation. He was from Fultondale, Alabama. I can see that smile of his. Everybody liked him. He was really something. Then I had two high school friends. I was on the track team with one of them, and one of them was like about a third, fourth cousin to me. I considered him family, him and his sister and his mother and daddy. But anyway, one that was on the track team was Bob LeCates. We would run together in the afternoons, and then Chad Barber, the one that was like a third or fourth cousin to me. He had already finished high school, and he would come down there and run with us because he was in ROTC in the officers training. And Bob LeCates went on to be in ROTC and graduated. And him and Chad Barber were located at the same base in Vietnam. And they were in as like an underground bunker officers club type thing. And they were sitting at a table, and a 122 millimeter rocket came through the top of the bunker right dead center of their table and killed both of them. Then there was, let me make sure this camera is still running. Yeah, it's still going. Then there was somebody that would have been my brother-in-law. I knew him. He worked at the spur station about 5 or 6 blocks from my house, straight up at the end of the street I lived on. I used to stop by there and get gas on the way home at night. I always put gas back in the car so there'd be enough, as much in there as I had used up that night. But him and his girlfriend, who later became my sister-in-law, they would sit around on the dark side of the station. There was a big security light that made a shadow on one side of the station. Well, he would back his car up there, and they would sit there and be kissing and hugging. I'd pull up to the pump, he'd jump out and come out and pump gas. But his name was Donald Montgomery. I believe he was in the 9th Infantry. But he got killed around the time I got wounded. A week or two after I got wounded. I've known him a long time. I liked him pretty well. Then later, I married his wife's sister. But please remember these people. This is old and crackadated, and I'm not saying if it can, it will, and it always happened to me so many times. But my brother always said, you know, you can't be killed. Because the blast radius of what I went through should have killed me. Just the blast itself. I was within the kill radius of the blast. And it didn't kill me. I didn't even lose consciousness. I guess God had a reason to pull me through it. Pray for those families that have lost loved ones in war. The saying that war is hell, I sure wouldn't want to be in hell if it's that bad.